Hello, I'm Yana Shravinsky and you're watching Break the Fake. They make them, we break them, and tell you everything you need to know. The Russian imperial logic, so breathtakingly absurd, it almost deserves a standing ovation. According to Kremlin propagandist Anna Shafran, Ukraine doesn't actually exist. The people? A mere dialectical misunderstanding. The language? Just a quirky offshoot of Russian. The faith? Well, obviously, there can be only one true belief, presumably whatever patriarch of Moscow is parroting at Putin's latest war sermon.
Я знаю точно, что это один народ. Никакого у меня, при всем уважении к нашим украинским коллегам, отдельного украинского языка не существует. Есть диалекты русского языка. Можно пойти вперед только в тот момент, когда мы внесем ясность в то, что происходит. А ясность состоит в том, что мы один народ, в том, что у нас один язык, в том, что у нас одна вера.
Look, if we follow this logic, the British should be gearing up to reclaim America any day now. After all, Americans speak English. Many of them are Protestant, and the US was once part of the British Empire. And what about Austria and Germany? Same language, same culture, clearly, one nation. Of course, the world doesn't work like that, except in the fever dreams of Kremlin nationalists. But let's entertain their premise for a moment. If Ukrainians are just confused Russians, then what does that make Belarusians? An even more confused subcategory of Russians? I don't know. And what about those regions in Russia itself that speak their own languages? Should the Kremlin be worried about its own dialects suddenly developing a taste for independence? The irony here is almost poetic. Moscow, obsessed with one nation, one language, one faith, can't seem to realize that the more it tries to force this fantasy on its neighbors, the clearer it becomes that Russia itself is a fragile empire, held together by repression and propaganda. Perhaps it's not Ukraine that doesn't exist, but rather the illusion of a unified, monolithic Russia. Maria Zakharova, Russia's chief of theatrical absurdity, has once again outdone herself. This time she claims that Ukraine, yes, the country fighting for its survival against Russian invasion, is somehow sabotaging US-Russia dialogue through terrorism. Let's break this down, shall we? According to Zakharova, Moscow's diplomatic struggles aren't due to its war crimes, imperial delusions, or the minor inconvenience of launching full-scale invasions. No, the real culprit here is Kiev, a city that's busy dodging Russian missiles, but apparently has enough time to sabotage world peace.
Киевский режим, окончательно утративший чувство самосохранения и связь с реальностью, в этом самом своем отчаянном стремлении любой ценой сорвать. Помните, еще недавно они любой ценой, как заявляли, готовы были победить, одержать победу, что-то там еще нанести, поражение, что только не придумали. А теперь они отчаянно стремятся уже никого не победить и даже не удержаться самим, а сорвать начавшийся российско-американский диалог. И для этого они используют откровенно террористические методы, нанося практически ежедневные удары по энергообъектам России.
This is the same Russia that calls Western leaders Russophobic for not treating its diplomats seriously, while simultaneously accusing Ukraine of blocking US-Russia talks that don't even exist. What exactly does she think Ukraine is doing? Sending strongly worded emails to the Kremlin's spam folder, perhaps? But let's give Zakharova some credit. If there were an Olympic event for inventing diplomatic grievances, she'd be taking home gold. Until then, she can at least compete for most ridiculous statement of the year, though in Russia's propaganda circuit, that's a highly competitive category, you know. Russia often paints itself as the inexhaustible source of arms and personnel, a country that can never be truly defeated. Too big to fail was once a phrase uttered with respect to banks, yet it seems like even those in the West bought into Putin's imperial fantasy of Moscow rising from its knees to become the titan among nations or something equally corny. And yet, from inside Russia itself, voices of dissent are slowly seeping into the collective consciousness. Watch this.
Многие наблюдатели, некоторые, в кавычках, аналитики, говорят о том, что мы можем воевать до бесконечности, это ерунда. У нас очень сильные потери, большие потери. Если воевать дальше, ты натыкаешься на необходимость проводить мобилизацию резервистов, такую же, как осенью 2022 года. А это смертельная опасность для Российской Федерации. И делается все нашими верхами, чтобы призывы резервистов не проводить, то, что вооружать их нечем будет. И снабжать будет нечем. Им все придется опять закупать, как в той первой волне. А сейчас, на 4-м году вот этой кампании, это, что называется, чревато.
You see, the Russian Z-bloggers are an unusual bunch. Sometimes they are more aggressive than Putin himself. They are often way better informed, because unlike the top brass at the Kremlin, they don't live in the proverbial ivory towers and instead are well attuned to troop morale and frontline realities. They are strange creatures in Russia's information ecosystems, propagandists to the core, but sometimes their zeal can get the better of them, leading tongues to slip and inconvenient truth to spill out. What Kalashnikov says here is not new. Many remember how Putin kept walking on eggshells not to anger the population, so each time the Russian state took more young people from society into the meat grinder, it was either branded as totally not a mobilization, where in fact it kind of was, or the objective was accomplished using underhand means, like filling the gaps in the ranks with prisoners, foreign mercenaries from as far away as Africa, actually, or even North Korean troops. The Russians have once invented a smart ploy known as the Potemkin village, making stuff appear larger and better than it actually is to impress somebody like a Tsar, a Soviet official, or perhaps an adversary. How else do you explain the Kiev in 3 days myth that was swept away by the reality of a war that's now in its 4th year? The legendary Armata tank that never saw action besides Red Square parade grounds, or the reports that Russia's Su-57 stealth fighter could be as stealthy as Slayer playing their biggest arena gig ever. There is also a quote that's been attributed to various leaders and diplomats over the ages, including Winston Churchill, and it goes like that: Russia is never as strong as she looks, and Russia is never as weak as she looks. Whoever said this originally knew their craft well, as they encapsulated the paradox perfectly. With disinformation, deception, and other trickery, the image of Russia is always opaque, but there are definitely cracks in this whole monolith. The question is, will the West help Ukraine explore those cracks and, keep them expanding? Today, Trump is doing his weird dance around Putin, and some say it's a bit like a shamanic rite to summon rainfall. Not likely to work. But then, we also had the Biden team who was scared out of their wits about escalation. And today we have Europe struggling to unite, struggling to confiscate billions in Russian assets or to ramp up ammunition production. We can't afford to use Potemkin tactics, We must be the real deal here. And so we end this episode of Break the Fake. Please stay with us here on TVP World for more latest news and features. I'm Jonasz Lewiński. Bye for now.